The morning my brother-in-law finally left, I was standing at the kitchen sink watching a cardinal sit on the fence post outside. Just sitting there, still, like it owned the yard. I didn't turn around when I heard his footsteps on the stairs. I didn't say a word. I just watched that bird and held my coffee mug with both hands and let the warmth move through my fingers. He expected tears. I know he did. He'd been expecting them for 2 years. He never got them. My name is Erica. I'm 63 years old. I taught 4th grade for 31 years at the same elementary school 3 miles from the house I've owned since 1998. I know every crack in the sidewalk on Merrill Street. I know which neighbors leave their porch lights on all night and which ones don't. I know my house the way you only know a place you've fought to keep. And I almost lost it. Not to the bank, not to a flood, not to any of the disasters you planned for. I almost lost it to a man who smiled too easily and stayed too long and mistook my patience for weakness. My husband, David, passed in the spring of 2021, pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 11 weeks. We didn't have time to say half of what we needed to say, and I spent the first year after feeling like I was moving through water, everything slow, everything muffled, everything just slightly out of reach. David had a younger brother. His name was Gary. Gary had been living in Phoenix for most of his adult life, working construction jobs that never quite turned into careers, relationships that never quite turned into marriages. He called David maybe twice a year. He didn't come to our wedding. He sent a card when our daughter was born. No gift, just a card with his name signed in blue pen like he'd done it in a hurry. David never spoke badly about him. That was David's way. He'd say, "Gary's got his own road," and leave it at that. I respected that about my husband. I didn't always agree with it, but I respected it. Gary showed up at my door 7 weeks after David's funeral. He was standing on my porch with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a bottle of grocery store wine in his hand, and he had that expression I'd later come to recognize, the one where someone looks just sad enough that you feel guilty asking too many questions. "I thought you might need some company," he said. I was 61 years old and I had just buried my husband and I was alone in a 4-bedroom house for the first time in my adult life. My daughter lived in Portland. My closest friend had moved to Savannah the year before. The grief was the kind that sits on your chest when you first open your eyes in the morning before you even remember why. So I said yes. That was my mistake. Not the only one, but the first one. He said 2 weeks. Just until he got back on his feet, sorted a few things out, figured out his next step. I gave him the guest room at the end of the hall, the one with the blue curtains I'd bought at a craft fair years ago. I told him there were fresh towels in the closet and that breakfast was usually around 7. The first 2 weeks were almost fine. He was quiet. He helped carry in groceries once. He watched television in the evenings without demanding anything. I told myself it was good to have someone in the house, that the sound of another person moving around in the rooms was helping. Then the 2 weeks became a month. The month became 3. He stopped mentioning leaving. He stopped mentioning leaving. He stopped mentioning much of anything that had to do with the future. He started to settle in the way water settles into low ground. Slowly, quietly, until suddenly it's just there and you can't remember when it arrived. His mail started coming to my address. Not just personal letters. I mean catalogs, packages, a jury summons. One morning I found a renewal form for his car insurance with my street address printed in the little box. I set it on the kitchen counter and didn't say anything yet. I was still in that phase where I kept believing things would resolve themselves if I just waited a little longer. He started inviting people over without asking. Not often at first. Just a friend from somewhere. A guy he'd met at the hardware store. A woman named Donna who sat in my living room for 4 hours one Sunday and used my bathroom twice and left without saying goodbye to me. I came home from a dentist appointment once and found 3 men I didn't know sitting on my back porch drinking beer. Gary introduced me in my own home. "That's my sister-in-law," he said, and turned back to his conversation. I went inside and stood in my kitchen and looked at the refrigerator for a long time. There was a specific afternoon. I remember it clearly because the weather had just turned cold for the first time that fall when I found Gary sitting in the armchair by the window in the living room. The chair with the yellow cushion. David's chair. The one I hadn't moved, hadn't touched, had left exactly where it had always been, because I wasn't ready for it to be anywhere else. Gary was watching football. He had a bag of chips on the armrest and his shoes on the ottoman. He didn't look up when I walked in. I went back to the kitchen. I sat down at the table. I put my hands flat on the wood and I looked at them for a long time. The rings I still wore, the knuckles that were starting to look more like my mother's every year. And something shifted in me in that moment. Not loudly. There was no voice, no dramatic declaration. It was more like a door closing very softly in a quiet house. I was done waiting for things to resolve themselves. I didn't say anything to Gary that afternoon. I've learned in 63 years that the most important decisions don't require an announcement. You don't tell the garden you're going to plant it, you just go get the seeds. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Patricia, and she's been handling my family's legal matters for over a decade. I told her the situation. I told her the timeline. I asked her what I needed to know. The first thing she told me was that time was not my friend. In our state, if someone has been living in a residence for long enough and receiving mail there and can establish it as their primary address, they may have tenant rights regardless of any verbal agreement, regardless of the fact that no lease was signed, regardless of the fact that his name appeared on nothing. I had to be careful. I had to be deliberate. I didn't panic. I wrote everything down. I went home and I started documenting. I noted the date, the circumstances of his arrival, the conversations we'd had about his stay being temporary. I wrote down the names of the people he'd brought into my home. I noted when his mail had started arriving. I kept a small notebook in my nightstand, and every few days I'd add to it. Just facts, just dates, just what happened and when. Patricia said the cleanest path was a formal written notice, not a conversation. A notice, documented, dated, delivered in a way I could prove. She drafted it for me. It stated that the arrangement was informal and temporary from the start, that I was terminating any occupancy agreement effective 30 days from the date of the notice, and that he was required to remove himself and his belongings by the specified date. I had it sent by certified mail to my own address, to Gary, care of my address, so that there was a postal record of delivery. I kept the receipt. Then I hand-delivered a copy to him myself. I waited until a Tuesday evening when he was in the kitchen eating leftover pasta I had made. I set the envelope on the table beside his bowl. I said, "This is for you, you need to read it." He picked it up. He read it. He looked at me. "You serious?" he said. "The date is on the letter," I said, and I went to my room. What happened next was a lesson in how people reveal themselves when they realize they've been found out. He was pleasant for 2 days. Overly pleasant, bringing me coffee in the mornings, commenting on my garden, asking about my daughter as though we were old friends having a nice visit. I recognized it. I'd had students over the years who did the same thing when they knew they'd been caught in something. Sudden, excessive helpfulness as a kind of bargaining. I was polite. I was not moved. Then he shifted tactics. The pleasantness evaporated and was replaced by a low-grade resentment that he didn't quite bother to hide. He left dishes in the sink. He stopped saying good morning. He had a phone conversation one evening, I don't know with whom, where I heard him say my name in a tone that made clear he was not speaking well of me, though he lowered his voice when he realized I was nearby. I kept writing in my notebook. He told me, about 10 days in, that he didn't have anywhere to go, that things were complicated, that David would have wanted him to be able to stay. That family wasn't supposed to treat family this way. I let him finish. Then I said, "David would have wanted me to take care of myself. I am doing that." He didn't have a response to that. He went upstairs. I want to be honest about something because I think people sometimes expect these stories to be simpler than they are. There were moments that were hard. Gary was my husband's brother. There were times I looked at him, the way he held his coffee cup, a gesture he made with his hand sometimes, and I saw something of David in it, and it hurt in a way that was hard to separate from everything else. Grief doesn't stop just because you're also angry. The two can live together. I know that now, but grief was not going to cost me my house. While Gary was busy resenting me, I was busy finishing what I had started. I went through every financial account, checking, savings, the investment account David and I had held jointly. I met with the bank and made sure everything was clearly in my name only, with no secondary access that hadn't been intentionally granted. I reviewed the beneficiary designations on my life insurance and retirement accounts and updated the ones that needed updating. I sat with Patricia again and we went through my will, page by page, and I made changes that reflected my life as it actually was, not as it had been. I changed the locks, all 3 entry doors. I had a locksmith come on a Wednesday morning while Gary was out, and I watched him work. And when he handed me the new keys, I held them in my palm for a moment before putting them in my pocket. I did not give Gary a copy. He had been given a key during what I considered a temporary arrangement, and that arrangement was ending. Patricia had advised me on the timing. I changed the locks after the notice period had already begun, which was important. I installed a camera at the front door and one at the back. Not hidden. Mounted, visible. I told Gary they were there. I said it plainly, without drama. I've added security cameras at both doors. He didn't respond. That was fine. I also called the post office and submitted a request regarding the mail. I spoke with someone there about what my options were and documented that conversation. Gary's mail was his responsibility to redirect. The 30 days moved the way 30 days do when you're watching them. Sometimes slow, sometimes in sudden jumps, always forward. On the 29th day, I came home from visiting a friend to find Gary sitting in the living room with 2 garbage bags and a cardboard box stacked near the front door. He was on his phone. He didn't acknowledge me when I came in. I made tea. I sat in the kitchen. I did not offer to help him carry his things. On the morning of the 30th day, I woke up early. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen sink and looked at the yard while the house was quiet. Around 9, I heard him come downstairs. I heard the front door open. I heard it close. I didn't go to the window. I didn't need to. About an hour later, I walked through the house. The guest room at the end of the hall was empty. The blue curtains were still there. His bags were gone. The bathroom down the hall smelled like the soap he used. That would fade. Everything else was already mine again. I went to the living room. I stood in front of David's armchair with the yellow cushion. I put my hand on the back of it for a moment. Then I moved it, just a few feet, to the window where the morning light comes through the strongest. It looked right there. I don't know why I'd never put it there before. I sat down in it for the first time. It fit me fine. There are things I know now that I wish I had known earlier. Not because I would have done everything differently, but because knowledge is the difference between surviving something and walking through it with your eyes open. I know that kindness and boundaries are not opposites. I was kind to Gary. I made him meals. I gave him a warm room. I never raised my voice, and I still drew a line and held it. Both of those things were true at the same time, and I don't apologize for either. I know that your name on a document is not a technicality. It is protection. The deed to this house is in my name. The accounts are in my name. My will reflects my wishes, not the assumptions of people who believe proximity entitles them to something. Those papers are not formalities. They are the architecture of a life you have built, and you should know exactly what they say. I know that when someone tells you who they are, through their behavior, through their comfort in your space, their disregard for your boundaries, their expectation of your accommodation, you are allowed to believe them. You don't have to wait for a larger violation. The smaller ones are enough. I know that silence from a woman does not mean she has accepted something. Sometimes it means she is thinking. Sometimes it means she has already decided and is simply getting her affairs in order before she moves. My daughter called me the weekend after Gary left. She'd known what was happening. I'd kept her informed without dramatizing it, and she asked me how I was feeling. I told her I felt like myself. She said, "Good. You sound like you again." I hadn't realized I'd stopped sounding like myself. But I understood what she meant. The cardinal came back to the fence post a few days later. Same one, I think. I can't be certain, but I like to believe it was. I was at the sink again, same spot, same mug. But this time I was just watching it because it was a beautiful morning, and I had nowhere to be, and my house was quiet in a way that belonged to me. I moved the armchair cushion outside and aired it in the sun that afternoon. I washed the blue curtains in the guest room and rehung them. I put fresh flowers from the garden on the kitchen table, the kind I'd stopped buying when the house had felt like it belonged to someone else's habits. Small things, but they were mine. If you're watching this and you recognize something in this story, if you have someone in your home right now who arrived as a guest and stayed as something harder to name, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to protect what you built. You don't have to be cruel to be clear. You don't have to explain yourself to everyone. You don't have to wait until something is taken from you before you start holding on to it. Know what documents you own. Know what your accounts say. Know what your accounts say. Know what your rights are in your own state, in your own home. Call an attorney if you can. Document things if you must. Change the locks when the time is right, and know that there is a right time and a right way to do it. I'm not a hard woman. I don't think of myself that way. But I am a woman who knows what her name on a deed means. I am a woman who learned later than I should have that patience has a limit and that the limit is mine to set. David is gone. I miss him every day, in the ways that don't go away, in the small moments and the large ones. But the house is still here. The garden is still here. The yellow armchairs by the window where the light is best, and in the morning when the coffee is hot and the yard is still, I sit in it and I feel like the person I worked my whole life to be. That is mine. All of it. And I am not letting go.